everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to another of our tech coffee break chats. Super excited this week to really focus on the cybersecurity threat landscape and how planning and having a good strategy to prevent that is really kind of the next step in our discussion here about strategy. The last couple discussions have focused on our technology roadmap concept, as well as developing an operational maturity level to be thinking more about the future and planning. We're super excited to have Ryan Rogers join us this morning, one of our senior engineers. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
If you could take a moment and introduce yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit about your background.
Certainly. My name is Ryan Rogers. Obviously, I'm a senior consulting engineer, as just mentioned. I have been with Elevity for about 5 years now. But I started my career back in the late 90s, actually starting with internet tech support for a small ISP in southern Wisconsin, and actually worked on developing some pretty early wireless technologies and building kind of a wireless high-speed network for underserved areas, and then moved on into IT consulting and have kind of been in that role ever since in various functions. That fortunately has let me wear kind of many hats and get involved with a lot of different aspects of client networks and a pretty broad technology map as well, which certainly helps with giving a much broader perspective on where your threats and attacks are coming from and helping clients navigate those.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We throw Ryan at our difficult problems, difficult challenges, complicated clients. He tackles all of those things and mentors and leads the team to just be better every day at what they do. So really excited to have you join us and share some of your experiences and have a good discussion here about strategy. As I mentioned earlier, before I ask you that question, reminder that use the Q&A icon in the Zoom control panel with a couple little thought bubbles there above the Q&A word or phrase. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer, please post those in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get to those throughout our next 20 minutes or so. As always, I have plenty that I can ask, but we'd love to hear your questions so we can get those addressed. So as I mentioned earlier, we have been talking about technology roadmaps and operational maturity, planning, thinking strategically, and there's probably nothing more important for people to be thinking strategically than security. So what have you seen in your working with clients that makes security such an important area for businesses to focus on?
Well, it really needs to be kind of the forefront of every business decision, is what impacts a new vendor, bringing in a particular piece of software, changing vendors, even some seemingly simple hardware decisions can have pretty large security impacts, depending on how they update themselves, what they connect to, and what those vendors' internal procedures look like. That really ties in well with what we're seeing out in the marketplace right now. I'm sure everyone has had a news story or a dozen at this point on the SolarWinds breach and the impact that is starting to have in the US federal government, as well as very large organizations worldwide potentially. Obviously, that choice of using SolarWinds and what appears to be a bit of a lax security procedure on their end with their update server seems to have put a lot of clients at risk. Now, fortunately, our strategies, as far as we are able to determine at this point, are not affected at all by that. But it really emphasizes that a simple choice of a vendor, you are basically adopting all of their security vulnerabilities if they have access within your network. And in the case of that particular breach, since that is such a great current example, they obviously didn't do some simple steps that we ask all of our customers to do in terms of protecting critical pieces of infrastructure that's having more than a simple password to protect it. Obviously, outside of the SolarWinds issue, just a simple decision of, hey, I want this accountant to have remote access into my server. How can we do that? And there are obviously many, many ways you could provide that level of access, but each one of them has a different security ramification to it. whether that's a direct access using a Microsoft product, using a third-party tool. Obviously, those choices are something you would want to have your IT department, or in the case of small to mid-sized businesses, your security partner, managed security partner like us, take a look at, and not make decisions kind of on the fly, which unfortunately, those are the decisions that come back weeks, months, or even years later and render you with a large vulnerability that you may not uncover in a timely fashion. And obviously, then you are scrambling to try to pass those risks, contact your clients that may have been exposed, and that really isn't a situation you want to be in. You want to, from the beginning, take the approach that security is your most important decision, and you're going to build your business decisions around protecting your clients, your customer data, and frankly, your employees as well from the risks that are going to be just naturally occur from having this always connected, always on world that we all live in.
Yeah, and increasingly so, right? I think many organizations are looking at doing more and more of kind of that, online or as a service kind of a model. In fact, our coffee break series in January is going to be focused on cloud computing and kind of the office of the future. And so making sure that you're understanding the security posture of your vendors, the things that they've put in place, will continue probably at an increasing level to be more and more important. And I'm glad you brought up the SolarWinds situation, because obviously it's a big deal, and there's a lot of news coverage about it. On one hand, it's valuable for us to hear that story and to understand the impact that has. On the other hand, for our clients, it almost is a little bit counterproductive, because a lot of people go, well, it's the federal government. We're not the federal government. We're not going to be a target of these issues and these attacks, which I think gives some people maybe a false sense of security, because if they're not big, they won't be impacted. So what are some of the attacks and breaches that you've experienced as you work with our clients that are, on the grand scheme of things, probably are on the small to medium size of that scale of organizational size? What have you experienced, and what could have potentially been prevented by better planning and security or strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Being a bit smaller does not protect you, unfortunately. Even here within the Madison region, we have seen, and I have seen, clients that appear to have some recurring probes into their networks, generally from exactly where you would expect, from actors that, based on their IP address and the origin tracing, get back to primarily Russia and China, but it is certainly not unique to those regions. And unfortunately, they keep trying, and there isn't exactly a large cost to them to continually to attack. So one example with that is, I started early on with some basically dark web monitoring that a client did have, and they would see some rather high value accounts get breached, or potentially breached, I guess we should say, from the dark web monitoring. So they did stay on top of that to some extent, and reset passwords, but they were a bit resistant in enabling the next step, which was using two-factor authentication, or what's more usually referred to as multi-factor authentication, to access their accounts. And what eventually happened after many of those attacks is someone in the organization fell for it. And so that email account got compromised. And that was kind of the start. That was the foot in the door. They got someone real email account, and could start sending emails and accessing, more importantly, the address book internally for those clients. So they could see the director of purchasing and accounting and information of that nature. So then they found out more valuable targets to go after. And inevitably, those accounts were more targeted and eventually breached. And then in that case, there was some emails back and forth between some purchasing targets that were approving checks to be sent to third-party vendors. Well, that wasn't the third-party vendor that was legitimate. So having all their paper trail on the inside, in terms of their emails back and forth matching up, looked legitimate. But once you went and actually traced where those came from, it was quite clear that those were nefarious targets, and obviously the bank got involved. And fortunately, I believe in that case, they were able to recover their funds, but that is not always the case. In that situation, there kind of are some training of your end users of how not to interact with, say, phishing emails in this case, was kind of how it started, as well as putting into place the kind of best of breed mail security system, which was Mimecast. That was brought into the fold thereafter to provide many, many layers of defense against email-borne attacks. And that is absolutely critical. Another example of a breach that had happened not too long ago as well was a client that had remote access enabled. All of their internal users change their passwords regularly. They use very complicated passwords, so everything is good from that standpoint. One user they did not force to have that level was an outside accounting vendor. And that accounting vendor, of course, also had privileged access to the server. So when that account was breached, they got into the server, had very high level access, could reset passwords of other accounts, and really could tunnel through and put a lot of ransomware onto PCs. And that was a circumstance there that did happen. They actually were able to lock down the entire network and effectively lock out the client from their own data. And the only way to recover from that was, fortunately, we had protected backups that were isolated, and we were able to recover from using those. That was a painful process, and that resulted in obviously multiple days of the business losing the ability to function. And both of those situations really could have been prevented by simply going back to the security partner. In this case, could be us, or whatever MSP you may happen to be subscribed to, and having them work with you to provide the most secure solution. And that's something that has to be reviewed regularly. It certainly isn't your network is secure today, so hey, in 2 weeks, 2 months, of course you're secure because you're secure today. That unfortunately is not the world we live in. The threats are emerging and changing all the time, so you really have to have a regular review of those security breaches and really use the knowledge from those other clients, other businesses that are breached to make sure that you aren't falling victim to the same gaps in their system.
Yeah, those are all, I think, pretty real world, pretty frequent things that we deal with and hear about. So good examples. A question that did come in, thank you for that, is does Elevity use SolarWinds? And I can say unequivocally no to that. But Ryan, could you spend a minute just explaining what SolarWinds does and why organizations would have that in place?
Yes, so SolarWinds, specifically what they refer to as their Orion platform, is the vulnerability that everything is kind of tied to in the media right now, because a lot of very large companies use that, and that system has a lot of pieces, modules you can add to it. And obviously, the more modules you add, the more it can do for you. SolarWinds can back up all of your network configurations to all of your network devices, as well as letting you monitor and manage those devices. So the really challenging thing with that breach is an update was pushed to that software package, which means anyone using that version or newer that had the auto updates could have gotten a bad update from, at this point, an unknown bad actor, and the network configuration inside of each of those networks essentially was exported, including some, frankly, confidential information potentially about some security keys of how to connect into your network. So that's kind of why that level of breach is so bad, and it's kind of hard to explain in the media in a 30-second news blurb of why that's so bad, because once they're in your network at that level, you kind of have to go through every single network device to verify that it is in fact running firmware from the original vendor, not some modified one from some hacker, and it is quite a daunting task. But we obviously do not use any of their products within any of our systems for remoting or for managing or monitoring any system. It is extremely popular. So that is kind of the problem with that particular piece of software. It's popular among the biggest of companies.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for the question. Please keep those questions coming if you have more. Yeah, it's easy to, at this point, kind of in hindsight, to point your finger at SolarWinds or for, the fact that people were using this application and say, well, it must have been an insecure application or insecure situation. And I think the reality is that many tools, individual tools, could be subject to this type of activity. And which is why we always talk about a layered approach. You can't just have one little thing or feel like one application is the armed guard or the flame breathing dragon that is protecting your data. It's got to be a multi-layered approach, so that if one piece does fail, there are other things in place to make it either more difficult or even challenging, impossible for somebody to do something really damaging. Out of all of the various options that are out there, we talk about multiple tools and multiple layers, whether it's tools, solutions, training. What do you think is the biggest thing missing from most organizations' arsenal right now to protect them?
On the kind of end user and account protection front, the simplest one, which actually would have likely prevented the SolarWinds breach as well, is the multi-factor authentication approach. And for any client that already is in the Microsoft Office 365 stack, it's included with your plan. So there is no reason from a cost perspective to not implement that. And what that is you have your password, and then you have another device, whether that is your cell phone or your home phone or or even a second email account, not tied to that, depending on how it's configured. So that when you log in, if you're logged in from a new device that's not trusted, you get a second challenge. You need to enter a 6-digit code from your cell phone, from a text message, or something of that nature to prove further who you are and that really is a device that is okay to connect from. The other portion that is extremely important is your anti-malware, anti-ransomware products. A lot of antiviruses, if they're kind of the older traditional style, they don't do a good job of reacting fast enough. And that's the key, fast enough. So it's fine if you can detect that your machine's infected, but if it's already ransomware and has already gone out to your server and connected to it, it's too late. The damage is done. So what we obviously use is a product called SentinelOne that is part of our security suite. And it actually is not relying on any sort of patterns or anything like that from a traditional antivirus perspective. It is all behavior-based and has a real live person, security operations center, I should say, team rather, that is behind it, that is actually looking at the alerts in real time. So the responses are extremely fast. When a ransomware tries to encrypt your machine, it actually intercepts that based on behavior, blocks it, locks down the machine, and pulls the machine instantly off of the network. So it never gets out, never gets to your server, never starts actually affecting your real data. And those 2 points alone can mitigate a huge swath of the attack footprint. The external attacks still are primarily email. Email is too convenient, so that makes it a convenient attack point. And for us, that means Mimecast is the protection. It is by no means the most simple to implement, but that is why you work with a company like us, because frankly, figuring that part out is our problem, and we have already solved that problem. We know how to manage it, we know how to secure it, and we know how to make it so it is as literally or as inobtrusive as possible, but knowing that any secure solution is going to be slightly less convenient for users. It is not convenient to always have to have your cell phone to log into a new device, but it does bring a new level of security. And of course, the most important always threat is the users inside a network and the decisions that they make. And really the only way to get your users on board to get them to have a security perspective is training. And whether that's training from Mimecast does have a solution, as well as a competitor called Know Before. They take different approaches to get to the same thing. One uses kind of comedy and skits to get people on board, and the other one is a more serious directed training. And kind of between those two products, depending on your company's culture, whichever one works best for you is a great choice. But the right choice is to do something with training, to have your users aware and something in front of them, even if it's just a 5-minute video that they watch every month that changes, just to kind of keep it in their head of every decision they make in their email, whether they're clicking on a link and what data they're entering. Those are decisions that have an impact on the business security moving forward.
Yeah, good, thank you. And for some people who have been regulars on our coffee break series, some of this, they're like, yeah, I've heard about those things, and I hope that you're recognizing that. And we're bringing these things up multiple times because I think it takes some time for these things to sink in, and it takes a lot of examples for organizations maybe to make a decision that some things need to be done differently. When we're talking about strategy and looking out further than this week or this month or even next year, I think organizations need to be thinking about where they're headed, what their goals are, what their the kind of the business risk is for these different decisions that they need to be making. And a factor of that needs to be the security risk associated with those directions. And some of the planning may just be budgetary, because let's be honest, not everyone can just kind of open up the books and write a big check for the best and all of the different tools available from a security perspective. And so that planning needs to happen. But when we do talk about a strategy and we're putting those in place, and we want to be helping our clients do that, how often does a security strategy need to be reviewed? Is this a set it and forget it kind of an approach and look at it every 3 years?
No, unfortunately not. So in terms of your strategy, in terms of vendors, you probably want to review that in sort of like a 6-month time frame as to if that is the best security solution for you. However, just in terms of when you're talking about any new products, any new services, it is an ongoing process. Any day where you are going to decide to bring in a new vendor, bring in a new application, or even change and start using a different type of PC or remote connection technology, every one of those decisions is a major security kind of checkbox. You have to kind of go through and see whatever change you're making, what implications that is going to have to how you secure your data and your network. So unfortunately, it is a constant review process, as well as reviewing who has access to your network, why, when, where, and to what degree. Obviously, adding a vendor to remote access is really easy if you want to give them access to your entire network. That's probably not the best solution. If your HVAC vendor needs to come into your network, they probably only need access to the HVAC controllers or something like that. And then limiting people essentially to access what they need and only what they need when they aren't a trusted employee or a trusted vendor that essentially your security vendor will need access to everything, but most other vendors will not. And so you should isolate and restrict your data appropriately.
All right. Well, good information and great conversation. There's a lot to consider and a lot to plan for. And, on the other hand, business needs to get done. And so, I think that's part of the conversation and part of the strategy. And I think we have the right tools and pieces and parts in place to help organizations think through that. And whether or not you lean on Elevity to help you with that, or you have other resources, or you do that internally, the point of these coffee break discussions is education, and for people to know that what's going on in the world, what things need to be thought through, and then every business needs to make the right decision for them, whether it's posture, whether it's spend, but it's critical that everybody at least spend time thinking about this and make the right decisions for them, whether that's to invest in the best and most solutions, or to strategically choose those options to align with what's best for their business. And again, we are happy to help in whatever way is best for you, in whatever way makes the most sense. But it's just critical that everybody spends time thinking and planning for how to proceed in this unfortunate new world that we all live in. There's exciting things associated with the new technology, but with everything, it creates risk as well. So wanted to thank everyone for joining. Ryan, thanks for all of the knowledge and your time. It was great chatting and having you share some of your perspective. As a reminder, for everyone starting in 2021, that sounds great, doesn't it? We'll be very happy to cheers to 2021 going away here in a few weeks, and looking forward to the momentum and the positive things that are going to happen in 2021. We are going to focus on the cloud in January. So our coffee break sessions, as well as our thought leadership event and webinar, will really be focused on the cloud and what should be moved to the cloud, the benefits, the challenges, the opportunities that exist with potentially removing the infrastructure from your office and leveraging the capabilities that exist in infrastructure as a service approach. So all of those events are on levityit.com events that you can check out and register for if you didn't receive the emails, or you will receive emails soon about those. Please, everyone, have a safe and happy holiday and New Year, and we look forward to connecting with you in January. If we can help further the conversation about security and about strategy and planning, please don't hesitate to reach out to your account manager, to your VCIO, to anyone at Elevity. We'd love to help and get those conversations started. So everyone, be safe, have a great end of the year, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks again, Ryan.
Very welcome.